flood management band, where the canals are maintained at their optimum level, above their optimum level, because we gotta get rid of water. The operational band is where they can be maintained at their optimum, within the optimum management level in these canals. And the water shortage band below that is where they need to be maintained, below, they might be maintained below those levels. Next slide, please. So this is part B, and this just describes those zones. Remember that graph? I'll show you again where the actual lake level is. You'll see those terms used. What happens is we never want to get to high band, because you can see it's 17.5 feet, or if it gets to 18 feet, there's a significant chance of breach in the dike. And ever since it got up that high, it actually went to 18.77 feet in 1947, which were major flood events, and the dike held. It didn't breach. But since then, we've had several degradations of the dike, and they're concerned that if it gets way up there, we're going to have a breach. So they try to manage it in that operational band. See where it goes from arrow to arrow? So they want to operate it in there. And that dashed line in the middle is this kind of critical zone where they say, if it gets within a foot of the intermediate, we've got to really move some water. Next slide, please. So these last two, this is, it doesn't say part C. So there's part C and part D. These are the two places they move water. So this is to the water conservation area. So I want you to see most of these decision trees, whether it's in whatever band, comes over here. They look at the tributary outlook, the seasonal outlook, the desirable or minimum of the Everglades impacts. And then all of these say either no releases or up to maximum practicable to the water conservation area. Now say practicable about 6 times. Maximum practical means how is it practicable to get that water level? Well, if you look back and you remember that water level in Water Conservation Area 1, 2, or 3, 3A, they regulate that and they say, oh, sorry, we're too full, we can't do anything there. Or we don't want to put things there because there's rainfall or other things happen. So that's the decision they make into these two. Next slide, please. This is the decision they make about the estuaries. This is part D, the last part in the Lake Okeechobee schedule. And they go from high, intermediate, and the low management band. So if we take down to the low, if the lake is down there at 13 or 14 feet, they might go through this decision process as what are the tributary hydrological conditions? Meaning what's the conditions in the Kissimmee Valley or the tributaries that are coming in? Is it really wet? Is it flowing in? How big is the lake stage within a foot of the intermediate? If that's true, they go to the next seasonal outlook. And if that's true, and very wet or otherwise, if it's otherwise, they come down here. If it's very wet, they'll come across here. And the two areas here they show are S77. Remember, that's Moorhaven over on the west coast to Coosatee. And the other is S80. So S77 will get 4,000, but notice it says up to. It doesn't say discharge 4,000. It says up to 4,000. And that's a recent addition to these schedules so that the Corps has some flexibility. They can say, well, we could discharge up to the 4,000 to the Coosatee, 1,800 to the St. Lucie, but we're going to go up to that. Maybe we'll start at this discharge rate and see what happens. And if we can, we'll have to go up to that. That's kind of the maximum level. So you can see they get about twice as much as we do. Now remember though, ours is at S80. We're always measured at S80. So they take into account if there's local runoff coming in the C44 canal, and we're discharging, let's say, 500 CFS, they can only put 1,300 CFS more coming from the lake. So they sometimes can't put enough, from the lake that they want to. They're mostly going out to Coosatee. In these lower stages, the very low stage, up to 450 to the Coosatee and 200 to us, we always say we don't need 200. Why don't the Coosatee usually needs it during this time? We say you take the 200 over there. So sometimes they go to 650 to Coosatee, and actually during some dry seasons, they really need more water. And they're trying to up the number here to say, in the dry times, please allow more water. Why is that the Coosatee needs? Is because during that dredge time, when they over-dredge the Coosatee to be the outlet, it took that whole watershed and overdrained it, about 700,000 acres. And unfortunately, when it gets dry, it gets really dry, and the water, the fresh water, salt water starts to come up into the estuary too high. And so they get real concerned about Vallisneria and other freshwater grasses that are in the Caloosahatchee. Remember, they're about twice as long a system as we are in the St. Lucie. And they're more natural as the Caloosahatchee River. We're more artificial as the St. Lucie Canal has been in there. So next slide, and then we'll come back. And
Can I ask?
Yep.
A monthly amount or a daily amount?
It's a daily amount, up to that number. So cubic feet per second, I know you're gonna hear that, or acre feet. Just, I can equate cubic feet per second as 646,272 gallons per cubic foot. So if you do the math, just think 646,000. So that's 1 cubic foot. So 1,000 cubic feet is 646 million gallons a day, right? So, you know, that would be, 2,000 would be double that, 1.2 billion gallons per day. So even at 1,000 cubic feet, when we got 1,800 cubic feet per second, 1,000 cubic feet at 646 million gallons a day coming out here, the city of Stuart uses about 6 million gallons a day. Okay, so this is 100 times more than that, right? So it's like, how crazy is that? All that water, just talk about wasteful of fresh water. Anyway, so the lake's coming down.
Hey, Mark.
You can see those levels.
Can you
Yep.
clarify who makes the decision on those discharges? Is it solely the Corps or is the
Okay.
district involved?
So you heard me talk about those three structures, S308 at Port Mayaca, S77, and S10A. Those are 3 out of the 6 that the Corps of Engineers regulates and operates. The other 3 south, the S354, 352, and 351, those 3 canals going south are operated by the Water Management District. So coincidentally, when this water control plan was formed, it also said we're going to form a local water management district. So in 1949, the state formed what's called the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control District, which is similar in size of what it is today. And it became, in 1970s, it became this South Florida Water Management District. So we have 5 water management districts. South Florida Water Management operates 3 of the outlets south, and the Corps operates 3 of the outlets, 2 of them east-west, and 1 to the LA, which also goes south. Next slide. So you see those numbers. So what does that do to the St. Lucie? You can see how we're, you know, this little chart they try to do every week. They look at this on August 9th. The top of this little chart, and I know you can't read it, but it says inflow from the lake, about 1,057 CFS. Then they got C44, C23, 10 Mile Creek, tidal basin, all totals about 1,900. So at this time, we weren't getting much from our local basin runoff, but we were getting a significant amount from the St. Lucie. And since May, you can see we're in a very low range for salinity right here at Roosevelt Bridge. So we were very critical for this particular, for oyster reef habitat. And that's really, really sad. Next slide. So this is what happened, as you've seen me show this before. There was May back there where we were at 20, 25 parts per thousand. The ocean's 35, and freshwater 0. That's perfect for oysters. Well, crashed, stayed down there for over 120 days. We're causing a lot of harm and death to our oysters. Next slide. But you can see it came back a little bit recently. Central Marine, here's Central Marine in August. We had some pretty, also comes with a discharge of the cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. Next slide. Here's the Caloosahatchee slide. See S77, S78, S79 out to the outer estuary. Same kind of thing. They show, well, this time there's inflow from the lake isn't much, but their C43 basin runoff is a whole lot. Again, that's 700,000 acres of basin compared to ours. So that's a big, big watershed. Next slide, please. So here you go. Now here's the busiest slide I got. And that's going to be kind of it. Okay, I won't go too much more. The ones in white are from January 30th to November in 2016. In black is January to December 2017, last year, and January through October this year. So just look at the relative numbers. Coming into the lake, big, big number. Going east and west, big numbers, about 200 or so billion gallons to us, about 400, 500 billion gallons to them. But look what comes from the lake to the Everglades, 48, 25, maybe 114. Very small. Look what goes south from the EA basin, this number, 432, 847, 487, and 307. The EAA has a big runoff component, a basin runoff component. When it gets wet, starting in May, they were discharging all of that water through basin runoff, through the stormwater treatment areas, into the water conservation areas. The water conservation areas filled up above their schedule. They said, oh my gosh, we can't put any water from the lake, and consequently it went away. During the dry times, like right now, they take about 100 or 150 billion gallons in water supply. They need irrigation water. They open up, that's 354, 352, and 351. So, next slide. Oh, if you can go back, also, thanks to Gary Goforth, we've been able to calculate a lot of the loadings. So you see the St. Lucie up here, 162,000 pounds of phosphorus. Nitrogen is 3.3 million pounds of nitrogen. And nitrogen is more critical to the estuaries than phosphorus. Phosphorus is freshwater lakes and streams, those are really critical. Phosphorus, nitrogen's critical for us. But look at the TSS, that's total suspended solids. And if you go out in the estuary now, you'll see stirred up all this muck and silt sediment, 35 million pounds of silt sediment. Huge amount. And we get that all the time. Every time we get discharged, a huge amount. It settles in these low, big areas, wide, low velocity areas like the middle estuary. If you go dive out here now in the middle estuary, it's about 6 or 7 feet deep. And muck. And I've dove down into there and it's like fine ooze and black mayonnaise. It's terrible. And it's overwhelming our seagrass, our oyster reefs, and it just sits there and becomes anaerobic. It's not good. Next slide, sorry, before we do. Last slide we're looking to do is obviously the desired flow. We want to make sure we slow down the flows coming from the upper chain of lakes, which they've channelized and gotten in too fast, 2 to 3 days instead of 6 to 8 months. Slow it down, attenuate it, treat that pollution at the source. Clean up the lake and let that lake water flow south. We don't need it east or west. The estuaries are fine if you just leave them alone. And the Everglades needs it. Florida Bay needs it. But it needs it clean, it needs it slow. It doesn't need fast, untreated water. Last slide. That's it. Maybe take a question or two.
I've got a question, Mark.
Sure.
Margaret, can you go back to the third where he's talking about the phosphorus and nitrogen and the total? Okay, I have a question. I know that the Palouse Hatchie gets twice as much discharge?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is their total TSS 27?
Good question.
With more discharge than ours is at 35?
Right. Almost similar in nitrogen, a little higher in phosphorus, but lower in this. Look at all this littoral zone. See all this marsh out here? That filters a lot of the water coming into the Palouse Hatchie Canal. So when that filters all through there, it just lowers the amount of total suspended solids. It also helped them to not get as much of the cyanobacteria. Remember, in summer this month, it was like 92% coverage in the lake. Thank you, Todd, and others who documented that. But basically, we really knew that we were getting a lot, but they weren't getting as much because of that filtration, but they were getting red tide. And as you know, the 8 or 9 events of those red tides, this one happened to be one that comes around to our east coast. But they have been getting that really bad situation over there for a long time. Jackie and then Jack.
So I'm asking this question just to kind of make a point. Just because this was the most interesting thing I learned when you talked about this, and I just want to make sure hopefully everybody got it. So, in 1948, it was written into the document to protect the agricultural area, the EAA. So that is law, to protect the EAA. And then what canals run into them? Ones that the South Florida Water Management controls. And, so, I mean, I think this is what Congressman Nast and others have spoken about, is that it's hard for us to fight something that's in this legal document from 1948. So how do you change things? You change it just like you would a city ordinance. You have to change the law.
Yeah, and Jackie's right. That 80th Congress, that law, basically this act of 1948, it's basically public law number 858 of the 80th Congress. And so it's section 203 of this public law 838. So what happens is any congressman or people can propose an amendment to this law to add, to amend, or change, or modify it, and that has to come as another act of Congress. This is an act of Congress, and that has to take an act of Congress. Of course, if a congressman submits it, 434 other congressmen have to agree, perhaps, or a majority of them, so it goes forward from there. And the House, that's the House side, and then the Senate has to agree with a companion bill, and that has to go forward. And sometimes these never get out of committee. They go to committees first, and the committees will start meeting. But January 3rd is our next Congress. This was the 115th Congress, the second session. They go 2 years in the second session. So this next session will be at the 116th Congress. This was the 80th Congress. So the 116th Congress starts January 3rd. So all those new, whether they're re-elected incumbents or they're new electeds to our Congress, which is now changing, we need to be aware of who's on committees, who sits on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee or other committees that govern this, and how can they understand our situation and perhaps make some changes. But again, it has to go through those steps and processes as a bill to actually become an act of Congress. We had one up here, and then we'll go back here real quick. Yes, sir?
Now, isn't it true, because there was so much algae on the lake,
Yep.
that a lot of that marshland is died off?
It may not have been a direct, the question is that the algae caused that die-off in the marshlands? And probably the relative answer is, and if we talked to Paul Gray, he couldn't be here today, but he would say basically it's the water levels that actually killed the submerged aquatic vegetation. We lost about 5,000 acres of submerged aquatic vegetation. What that means is that aquatic vegetation gets drowned too much by water level, more so than algae that kill. Yes, sir, back in the back, and then we'll come to Greg. Yes,
I
sir.
had a quick remark. It's to follow up on Jackie's. It's always been my point of confusion about, you look at what Congressman Mast introduced around the Stop the Harmful Discharges, called the HR 6700, that affects that 1948 law. Did I get that
Right.
right? Okay. That prioritizes agriculture, certainly over health and human services. So do we have to change that law, or can that sort of priority be incorporated in what is coming out of Order 2018 that will become the new LORS schedule? So help me understand that piece.
To understand, and I'll put it really basic, I think that the intention of 6700, that his introduction, which hasn't gone anywhere yet, but the idea is, he put the word, has it? It has gone. So he put the words basically public safety in there. Remember we read the purposes for the act? It was flood control, navigation, irrigation, all those other things. There was nothing about public health and safety.
Right, can that be put directly in LORS 2018 without making changes to the underlying federal law?
Probably could, if the core, but remember, the LORS 2000, let's say the next LORS schedule is gonna be coming up for review this coming year. If we look at that and put that in there, it's a guidance, it's a water control plan guidance for the Corps of Engineers to operate. It's not a mandated, as in the law, for the purposes of that water control plan. So it becomes a guidance for water control, which they actually state in their opening statement of every weekly call that they'll consider public health and safety. But does it affect the fact that they'll consider that and then they'll still do discharges, or they'll do it this way? That may or may not happen. But we need to be attentive, and we need to have people that do submit changes or help relatively change it, and are bold enough to step forward and say, we need to amend or change or modify this to get the water right and to put it in the right places for the right things. Yes, back in the back. I'm sorry, and then we'll come to Greg. Back in the back.
Yeah.
Stand up so we can hear you.
Yeah, So I know a lot of people are looking forward to the revision of the Lord schedule, and they're looking to have the low number, the lowest level reduced. In your presentation, you said you can't keep the water too low for too long. Would you care to itemize the adverse effects of keeping the water too low
Yeah.
for too long?
Right, so if you look at a hydrograph, which is the water level in Lake Okeechobee, which I didn't show it, but since 1931 to currently, it went to its highest level in 1947, November 2nd, actually 1947, 18.77 feet. It graphs like this, it went to their lowest level, I think it was in 2001, that it went down to 8.67 feet. There was a time after that, it might have gone just a little bit lower a couple of years later. But, so 8.5 feet and 18.5 feet. So you want to consider, well, what's ideal for the lake, or what's best for the lake? And what we've always heard is like 12 to 15. Now, in the schedule it says 12.5 to 15.5. But when Paul Gray gets on and he starts talking, can it go lower? Can it go to 11 or 10 or 9? And it has gone down that low. The point of it either going lower or higher is the length of duration. How long is it going to go that way? So just like our estuary, the estuary can take a whole load of fresh water, but after 28 days of that, it starts killing oyster reefs, right? Simply the same thing in the lake. If you got too long of a duration of a flood event over the top of the submerged vegetation in the lake, it'll kill the vegetation. If you got too low of an event for too long, other things would start happening to the same littoral zone and ecosystems in the lake and harmful to the lake ecology. We have to be sensitive to the lake ecology. But we also have to be sensitive to the fact, can it go lower or can it go higher? Can it be kept higher? And we've always argued the fact, well, yes, they'll improve the dike, but the previous governor's been told over that it can't, just because you repair the dike, you're not necessarily going to keep the lake higher because you don't want to drown the lake, you don't want to kill the lake. And I was there back in the year 2000 when the Water Management Decision Governing Board, Chairman Brewerman at the time, made it was like appalling. They made an environmental decision to lower the lake in order to save the lake. We've been drowning and drowning and drowning for the past 10 years. So in year 2000, they said, let's lower the lake. Everybody share the adversity. That's where that phrase came from. Share the adversity. So we said, okay, we understand we got to save the lake. We'll take some, Kusatchee and South. Well, it may not have been so equitable back then to who shared the adversity. But what happened was in that year, it got to year 2000, it got to the dry season this time of year in the winter and kept getting drier all through the spring. So in May of that year, 2001, that's when it hit that low level of 8.7 feet. So we have to be pretty careful how we manage that lake. Greg, and then we'll go to one or two more. Yes, sir, Greg.
Okay, so the regulation schedule has been modified a number of times.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the environmental activists and the coastal communities, our input has been overshadowed by the political appointees at the Water Management District. Can Florida Oceanographic and or this entity assemble a series of recommendations for how we can be more effective in negotiations for the changes of the laws this next time?
So the question seemed to be the governing board on one hand, but also how can we be more effective at effecting changes? The governing board, the 9 members of the governing board are certainly the influential body in South Florida of our water. Yes, the Corps of Engineers does it, but it's about this 50-50 compromise and mix is that they talk about it and they decide together what to do. The district governing board, they're appointed by the governor. And right now there are basically 3 that are up for, their terms are up in March of this coming year. Their terms are actually up for the 3-year term. And then 1 is not confirmed, Michelle Peterson. She's not confirmed by the Senate. So what happens is the governor appoints these 9 members of the governing board, and he can do this to all 5 water management districts, and they have to be confirmed by the Senate, Florida Senate, which will convene in April this year. But he has that ability to wait till March, till the terms are up, or as courtesy as a new governor, basically they all say we're ready to resign, and you can appoint all new ones. So I guess one of your questions is, can we pressure the governor to appoint all new members? And I've actually, whether on the record or off the record, talked to both candidates, and they seem to like, yeah, we understand that that's what has to
Can I
happen.
make suggestions?
Yeah. Yes,
Now, can we, can this group?
suggestions on who or what to do? Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, like, could this,
Yep.
could we as
Go
a
to his
group
transition.
ask the governing board to send names that we think would.
Oh, you don't ask the governing board, you ask
Yes.
the governor, correct. Governor.
So just
Sorry.
further with that.
Yeah.
If you, through this coalition, can put together the recommendations
Yes.
that collectively we agree to, then you've got the power of these
Yes.
105 organizations applying pressure
Well, that's really what
to
I'm
the
saying.
governing board.
That's basically my point.
Yes, yes. So basically what you should do is go onto the South Florida Water Management District site, and under About Us or the governing board, you can click on there and see the members. And each member has their term, and it also has where they represent. Like there's one representative from Broward County or Miami-Dade, but there are a couple of representatives at large who cover multiple counties, like Martin, St. Lucie, and the River, and other counties. So if you look at where they're supposed to be geographically, the qualification would be, well, they need to probably live in that area. And the other qualification might be they need to be of significance of knowing water issues or, that kind of thing. So how that's been done in the past has been on a little kind of on the cuff, but it all comes down to the governor. So what the governor does is then look at reviews, people who have been suggested or who have been, nominated or looked at, and he can make his selections accordingly. So George, and then you, and then we'll go over there, and then we'll end up.
I just want to go back to Mark's
Real
point,
quick.
that usually when a governor comes in, he has a transition team. The transition team under the governor usually asks all the high-level appointees on most of the committees and most of your department heads with the agencies or whatever for their resignation.
Yeah.
If the governor then wants to keep you, you get your resignation back. That's the way that works. So technically, all these guys are up for grabs. At least that's the way it's run for my 34 years of government. So they may want to change things. It's not etched in stone, but that's normally the way it works.
So the transition team is DeSantisTransition.com. So if you go to that website, DeSantisTransition.com, you'll see they've already selected some people like the chief of staff and other people that they're talking about organizing, how that organization is put forward. So you contact them, you say, we're wanting to suggest certain things, and that's where that goes from there. This question, and then to Steve.
So we've all been at this fight. I mean, I'm 27, we've been doing this since I could remember. If we have to discharge, we look at the total suspended solids and all the loads coming out. Why can't we filter some of that water, like, water treatment plant, for it to come out? Because a lot of that excess nutrients is what's causing our problems. So what about as an alternative, not the solution, but in the meantime, what about us filtering the water if it has to come out?
Well, good point. What about filtering the water? Well, as you know, whether it's Port Mayaco or even S80, it's a pretty narrow place where you have to have a potential to collect that water and filter it before it continues to flow downstream, right? So it's not like it's this big wide system where it's hard to manage where that water is. And just think about it, if you and I were discharging that type of polluted water into the waters of the state, wouldn't the state come and fine us every day for $20,000 to stop pollution? Exactly. So if it's required that the federal and the state do these discharges, and that almost came about with a case called the S9 case. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court a couple of years, several years back now. S9 is a structure down lower in the L67, right on the western side of Broward County. S9 pumps water into the Everglades. George was actually the park manager down there for a while. Pumps right into the Everglades. So the contention was the Everglades folks who had, or just others who had a lawsuit, said that's pumping polluted water into the Everglades. And they were absolutely right, good document, with their own data. But it went, and the challenge, we paid the taxpayers, the legal team of the South Florida Water Management District to fight that, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And their argument was at the district was, our pumps don't pollute the water. It's just operational. And it's not our pumps or our operations that are polluting. we just are transferring it from here to there. So the judge up there, the judges said, this is crazy. This needs to be a state issue. And they threw it back down. They had all kinds of depositions, Paul Gray and others for years. And it just really, it all it minimized out was settlement out of building like a retention area near the S9 pump station to help filter the water before it goes in.
Some of that water comes all the way from
Yep.
the east, all the way through Broward, and then
Through
all the way
Broward.
through Weston and whatever.
Yep.
That canal is
Good.
unbelievable, and it dumps.
So that proved, I mean, if they were to win that thing, what they want to do is get what's called an NPDES permit, National Pollution Elimination Control permit. And that would have required permits on all of the structures, all around these bodies. S80, S308, all these S structures would have to get an NPDES permit. And guess what? They didn't want to get that permit. When it went to the Supreme Court, our water management district embodied all of the water districts around the whole country and said, if this passes, if this goes through, all of y'all will never be able to move water from here to over there without this kind of permit. And I said, I'm saying, why not? I have to get a permit, but you ought to get a permit.
I mean, if
To move
my
water.
septic system's leaking, I'm environment friendly, I didn't know it,
Yeah.
someone did some random test. Not only do I get fined, but I have to pay out of pocket to fix it.
Exactly.
So how are they
No,
gonna?
you're absolutely right. Keep that thought, keep the pressure on. Somebody should be filtering water. Stephen, and then we're gonna wrap it up with another.
So Mark, I didn't know if you were able to express to them why Lures was being moved forward early. Did you express that?
I did, I held up the act that was passed and the word of bill.
But who put it forward?
Well,
Your congressman, your local
Congressman,
congressman, Brian Mass, put that forward,
Okay.
just so we're clear.
there we go.
And that's a big deal, because we
to
would
put
not
it
be
in-
where we are with that not being moved forward in the last Congress, correct?
Right.
And then secondly, to your point, sir, we had the Human Health Service, that is the amendment that we're working on with Bull Sugar, and we did that 9 months ago. We started on that. So that is the amendment to that 1948 Act.
Yeah,
So
and
there's-
I appreciate
We're not
that.
sharing everything here today, but there's a lot of missing parts that Brian and other organizations are working on.
And I understand,
as
I'm
well as
still
moving
just
forward.
looking for clarification,
Oh,
that
no.
both are necessary and how they work together.
And we should continue to have that communication on how that
And
will,
I think what Mark
if it
said
gets
earlier,
implemented, how it will
having
get
that dialogue with the new leadership that's coming into power in the House.
Yep.
Just want to see how they move things, right? Having those letters, going up and visiting them, meeting with people in TNI. I think that's a great idea, and we're going to see how they move that ball forward.
So, Stephen, the question is to you, and with folks here, is now that it's a Democratic leadership in the House, they'll appoint new chair to the TNI Committee, Transportation Infrastructure.
That is correct.
Of which Brian Mass serves on from our District 18, so we're appreciative of that. But he will be kind of in the minority compared to the majority or the
Correct.
leadership.
The neat thing with TNI.
Who will be the leader in the?
They have to pick that.
They have to
right?
still pick
Just
that.
like they will with the speaker and others.
Okay.
But he's committed to staying on that particular committee.
Good.
And one reason is because of the camaraderie and what he's doing working across the aisle on that particular committee.
Okay,
It's not
good.
really, it's things of this nature that he's done and was able to pass and get that bill and this amendment for Lures to move forward. So them working
Okay.
together on these water issues is